Good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar on Transit Asset Management Communication and Compliance. My name is Laura Zale and I am the Manager of Asset Management at SEPTA in Philadelphia. And as the Chair of the APTA Performance-Based Planning Committee, I have the honor of moderating this first in the series of webinars on asset management, communication, and compliance. I'll be joined this afternoon by Michigoni Smith from the FTA and Luke Westland from Denver RTD. Next slide, please. Great. So here's a quick overview of the webinar. I just gave introductions and we just took a quick poll. As a housekeeping note, all the slides are available for you to download. Most of the agendas for today, we will have our two main presentations and we'll answer most of our questions after the presentations are complete. We have a generous amount of time allotted for Q&A with our panelists, and we'll give you some information about what to expect from us next. Next slide, please. Speaking of questions, we do have a chat pod window open, and we want you to be a part of the dialogue today. So follow the instructions on the screen, and throughout the webinar, the APTA staff will be passing those questions along to us so that we can be sure to answer them if we can do it in the time that's allotted today. Next, please. What brings us here today? We all have our SAM plan signed on October 1st. We've all started our NCD reporting, so we're done, right? Right. The reality is that many of us are in this process of implementing the changes and procedures that we said that we were going to in our TAM. We might have collected our initial inventories and done our initial condition assessments, but a lot of us had a lot of recommendations for future processes to implement. And as we talk to the asset management staff across the country, we find that a lot of us are in the same boat. We're working on two major issues: collecting quality data to inform decisions and communicating not only about TAM, but also about the data itself. Next slide, please. So to help you all with these issues, we've developed a series of webinars. We have the one today, Communicating TAM Compliance and Programs. This is almost a presentation about giving presentations to people within your organization. The next webinar is going to be about engaging your TAM stakeholders. We'll focus on communicating within your organization and also with external stakeholders, your DOTs, your MPOs, and likewise. And the third webinar will pertain to data collection, data quality, and data governance. We're also going to talk about the procurement process of procuring TAM software. Next slide, please. These webinars and the content that we're going to discuss are based on the work of the APTA TAM SGR Standards Working Group. We've been reconvened since April of last year, and we've published two documents this year that are available on the APTA website. The URLs are included on the web slide there. And we're going to be talking about the first one of those documents today, and the second one will be addressed in the fall webinar. Next slide, please. And then I wanted to let you know we have a couple of documents coming up that we're going to be soliciting comments for. We have one called Building Internal Stakeholder Support for Your Asset Management Program. And the second is Communication and Coordination with External Stakeholders for Transit Asset Management. Both of these comments will be out for public comment in May. And you might be wondering, how do I get to look at some of these? If you are an APTA member, these will be sent to you, and they will also be available on the APTA website. And Luke actually has a slide in his presentation that shows you how to get to these. The third document that we have coming out, hopefully in June, is called Procuring Software to Support Your Asset Management. We really welcome your feedback on these upcoming white papers on how to improve your program. Now I'm going to get to the main part of our presentation, Our first presenter is Ms. Shadoni Smith. Ms. is the TAM Program Manager for the FTA. Ms. Shadoni has 20 years experience in transportation civil engineering. Since 2014, she has managed Federal Transit Administration's Transit Asset Management Program. Dr. Smith received her undergraduate degrees from Michigan State University and her doctorate from the Georgia Institute of Technology in 2010. She has lived in 7 states and currently calls DC Metro home. She's an avid tennis player and a reader of science fiction. Mish, I'm looking forward to hearing your presentation.
Thank you, Laura. You make me sound so interesting from that bio. Well, today, thank you all for joining us. And today I'm going to talk a little bit about our transit executive communication slides and really focus on how to use the tool. This is really going to be a behind the scenes in terms of using this tool. I want to give you some information about the presentation. I'm calling it a tool, but it's a presentation, a series of slides with instructions on how to customize for your unique environment. A little backstory, initially this was planned to be a traditional training where we would offer an hour briefing for executives, and we realized that a one-size presentation was not really going to meet the need of every agency's priorities. So we thought about it and said, how can we make this so that it actually fits the need for a specific agency? And the idea came about to make it a fully customizable, pick your own adventure type presentation that you could download and then input your own agency information and frame it in a way that made sense to your executives. We had a focus group in July 2017 at TRB's 12th National Asset Management Conference where we launched this tool and got a lot of feedback from the attendees there and have since updated and posted the tool on our webpage at this URL. The purpose, again, is to provide a customizable slide deck for agencies to use in communicating with their executives about TAM. And as I mentioned, it's a choose-your-own-adventure format, and what that means is no two offerings of this presentation should be the same because they should be customized to the agency in which it is being delivered. Today's presentation will not focus primarily on the content, but on the format, and really get into the how to use this tool. And I will spend a little bit of time talking about the timelines and implementation because that flows very nicely with some of the materials that APTA Standards Group has been working on. So let me tell you a little bit about the tool. Again, I mentioned it's fully customizable. You can add, modify, or delete slides, delete specific bullets if they don't relate to your agency or to your executive's interests, and add them as you need. It's really just a baseline presentation to help you kind of start. I know for me, it's always easier to edit than it is to create. So this is that extra resource for you guys to start from some baseline. There are 4 themes that should run throughout the presentation. The first one is safety. There's also operations. The third is customer service. And then the last one is kind of a mix of resources, time, and money. Now you can select one of these themes or you could select all 4 of these themes based on what is really pressing or of interest to your executives. And you'll see that throughout the presentation, you can refine the slide notes and the bullets within the slides so that they focus on specific themes. There are also specialized slides for Tier 1, Tier 2, group plan sponsors, and group plan participants. The maximum presentation is 24 slides. Now, that doesn't include the user manual or the user guide, which are the first 5 slides. And this is really just kind of walking you through some of the information that I just went over, the purpose, the organization, how you would format it or how you would edit it for different themes, and how you use the tool. A really brief outline of the contents. The first couple of slides are the user guide. Then it goes into the introduction and the TAM business model. Next, it talks about how TAM can help your agency, and this is very closely related to those themes I mentioned. And then it talks about the vision for a mature TAM program. Now, some of you guys are already at a level of maturity where maybe you can add or refine some of those bullet points. And some of you may not even want to reach certain bullet points there. So you can definitely modify that for the group that you are giving it for. And then the last 2 areas are the federal requirements and then the timelines and implementation status. I'm going to spend most of my time in the user guide explaining how to use this tool and at the timelines and implementation status. So without further ado, let's get into the user guide. So I know this is very text heavy and I am not going to read it, but what I do want to highlight, if I can figure out how to do that, just bear with me for one moment, is that there are 4 purposes that we have identified for which this presentation might be used. And, oh goodness, that is not good. Okay, so you'll see the numbers in the text. And the presentation might be used for getting started, for kicking off TAM efforts, educational for executives that do not have a background on TAM. It can also be inspirational to, get the TAM team together, build enthusiasm and support, or it can be updates focused to provide information on your project, progress, next steps, or a combination of the above. So those are kind of the 4 expectations of how this tool could be used. Okay, thank you. The next slide kind of goes over some of the formatting parts of the user guide. So the way that we communicate through this tool is that there are 4 different types of instruction. The primary type of instruction is a comment bubble, and I will show this on the next slide. And the comment bubble just tells you that there is more information on this slide and how to use this slide to get the message across that you're trying, or that the slide is intending. Another way to format is the red and underlined text. Red and underlined text means you need to change this. You cannot leave this as it is. It'll say something like agency name, so you definitely need to input your agency name there. Another instructional element is the bold and italicized bracketed items. This means that you can edit this information specific to your agency. Some may not be relevant, so you need to just kind of take a look at it and see if you want to keep it. If you do want to keep it, you should modify it. If you don't want to keep it, just delete it. And then the last one is just bold text. Bold text is just calling out information. It doesn't need to be changed. It doesn't require editing. It just is there for you to say, okay, this is a major point on this slide. And there are also 2 sets of slides that refer to the different tiers, Tier 1 and Tier 2, and also group plans and group plan participating. All right, so let's take a look at this one. I know there's a lot of visual interest here, but this shows you those 4 different instructional areas I mentioned. As you see, the red circle shows you the comment bubbles, and that is reflected in the information on the right rail. It talks to you about what information you want to hit on in this slide. Looking at the actual slide, the red text is red and underlined, and that means you need to change this. If you don't change it, this presentation won't work. Thirdly, the bold and italicized bracketed items, those are your themes. So here you need to select a scenario based on your theme selection, and you can carry that through the rest of the notes. And then lastly, the bold text is just for emphasis. But one thing I do want to also mention is that there are slide notes on every slide. So if you're not necessarily sure what information to portray for each slide, there are notes which give you a little bit more information about what to present. I'm going to go past this slide. We just talked about this, but I was mentioning the slide notes are a script that you can use. You can customize it based on your theme, and it's there kind of to help you understand the intention behind the slide. So now that I've talked a bit about the how to use the tool, I'm going to give you a really quick look at the tool. And I've selected just a handful of slides to show you what information is available on the executive communications tool. So this is the first slide, the header slide, and this is something that you want to name that's going to be interesting to your executives and has some sort of relevance to your agency. So we just left it very generic. The next slide talks about the purpose, and I mentioned this earlier as how this presentation was formatted is to have a couple of different uses, getting started, educating, inspiring, and updating on where you are in your asset management, and you can also use it for other. I do want to highlight that we attached our FTA KM video in the presentation, so if you are doing the educate or inspire purpose, you may want to show this video to help your executives understand that this is an initiative that FTA is very proud of and is very focused on. And some of your partner agencies are also highlighted in this video. So you can also get some peer sharing through here. This video is also available on the TAM webpage for download. So the next slide is just showing you one of the selected themes that I am highlighting here is the customer service theme. And this slide just talks about issues related to or benefits related to customer service. There were other slides I haven't shown in this presentation, this webinar, that relate to the other 3 themes as well. But you see that each here is red and underlined, which means you need to select one or all of these and then move forward with them in your presentation. And this is the vision for a mature TAM program. This kind of gets beyond the regulation context, and some of these bullets may not apply. You may have already achieved this level of maturity or be striving or have no intention or desire to go to this level of maturity. And if that is the case, then you'd want to customize it so that it actually spoke to your specific executives. And then I wanted to also show you how the presentation talks about the timelines and the implementation. This is the table that is in the slide deck, and it is intended to convey where your TAM program is with regard to the federal requirements in a simple format that your board could follow. However, our partners at APTA have come up with an even better communication method that could not only communicate where you are with your TAM requirements, but also serve as a record keeping or even a one-page handout correspondence to help educate not only your executives, but anyone on where you are in your TAM plan development. And with that, I believe I am going to turn it back over. Did I go in the wrong direction? I did. But I'm going to turn it over to the next speaker.
Great, thanks, Mish. I think this is a fantastic tool, and we all know that when we get called on to give these presentations, having a template to follow is amazing, because not only do you have to give the presentation and get your information all together, but you usually have to do it with very short notice. And I really would have appreciated having this template when I had to speak to our board about our TAM program. Mish, do you have any idea of how many folks might have downloaded or used this tool?
I don't have exact numbers. Sorry, no, I don't.
Oh, well, now we have 257 more people who have the potential to use it. So that's pretty cool.
That's great.
Great. Okay. So again, if you have any questions for Mish, please feel free to enter them in the chat pod, and we will address those during the Q&A portion of our webinar. I'm going to introduce our next speaker. Our next speaker is Luke Westland. Luke's background includes 12 years of vehicle maintenance. Most recently, Luke has spent the last 6 years helping to develop the asset management program at RTD in Denver. He also has an asset management certificate and diploma from the Institute of Asset Management, the IAM. Please welcome Luke Westland to the webinar.
Okay, hi, my name's Luke, and I'm going to walk you through this newly created APTA document that Mish actually just referenced at the end of her presentation. Next slide. So here's just RTD overview. This is just for your reference. I'm not going to read through these. I only include this so you can put my opinion and this document in context with your own organization. Next slide. So same thing applies here. If you're interested, this is our system map. I put the link in the bottom left-hand corner if you're curious. Next slide. So my goal is real simple. I'm going to introduce you to communicating your transit asset management plan. And this is that newly created document. I've included the link on the bottom left-hand side of the screen, which opens up to the web page, which you see on the right, and some other resources as well. I've also included the actual APTA document number on the top of the screen. So for whatever reason, you can paste that into Google search and it'll bring you right to the PDF in your search results. Next slide. So before we dive into the APTA document, I'd like to talk a little bit about our TAM plans and what they mean to different groups of people. I think for most people, the TAM plan, it's a long document. I think ours with the appendix is about 70 pages. And it's filled with technical information, asset information, and for some it's viewed primarily as a compliance activity. So for me, it's no surprise that there isn't a wait list to read this. But for us, the asset management enthusiasts, if you will, the TAM plan, it's a big deal. It's a culmination of months, many months, if not years worth of work, and it's something we should all be proud of. My point is that this document only matters to a select group of people within our organization. And I believe it's our responsibility to make the TAM plan tangible to a broader audience, and to make it tangible, we need to simplify the message. Next slide. So I propose this question: can we communicate our TAM plans in a single page, front and back, in less than 5 minutes? The answer is yes, and this APTA document assists us in that effort. Next slide. So why? Why do we communicate? Why do we need to communicate our TAM plan? So to paraphrase, MAP 21 fundamentally shifted the focus from new assets to existing assets. And I truly believe it's our responsibility to create the TAM culture to assist in shifting the focus. And communication is a critical first step. Next slide. So I'm going to start here. I'm going to start you off with the end result. So this, which is a simple table, I want you to keep this in the back of your mind as I go through the remaining slides. And this is the actual document we use here at RTD. So let's jump in. Next slide. So when you first pull up the document, you'll look at the table of contents, and you'll see the procedure is part of the first page, but the appendix is actually 16 pages long. So the value exists in the appendix, and in the appendix we have examples and templates. The examples are for Tier 1, Tier 2, and Group TAM plans, and then the corresponding blank templates. I only reference Tier 1 examples within this presentation because Tier 2 and Group TAM plan will just be a variation of the Tier 1. Next slide. So here is a Tier 1 example right from the document. You'll notice it's slightly different than the RTD example. This one includes a third column on the right-hand side, and this third column was added as an option. So if you wanted to put links to the documents that correspond with the specific requirements, it's there, and it's intended to add another layer of visibility within your TAM plan, but still keep it under that single page front and back. Next slide. Again, now we're into templates. Templates, again, Tier 1, the only difference is the one on the right includes the third column I just mentioned. Here at RTD, we chose to use the simplified version on the left-hand side because we wanted to create the document as soon as possible without worrying about access to shared network drives, setting up a SharePoint site, etc. And we can always add those at a later date. So not a huge deal, but we wanted to get started. We didn't want to have any excuses not to do this. Next slide. So now let's talk about who creates this and who consumes this information. Bish touched on a few of these, who might consume this, but the person that needs to create this is an individual familiar with your agency, its assets, and the TAM plan requirements. So most likely, I'm sure you can all guess that this is going to land on the shoulders of somebody in your asset management group. And then who consumes it? This is your board member, your general manager, CEO, senior staff, maybe even an auditor, a new employee, or truly anybody that asks or willing to listen. Next slide. The instructions are super simple. Spend your time reading through the examples in the appendix. That's where the value is there. Decide if you want to manage those links or not, yes or no. Choose the correct template, Tier 1, Tier 2 group TAM plan. Fill out the template. And remember, brevity is the goal. And if you think about it, we all have our TAM plans or participating in a group TAM plan. So this information already exists. So creating this table or this single page document should be super easy. You can just copy and paste that information, revise it right into that table. So this shouldn't be a heavy lift. There should be no reason you couldn't start using this tomorrow. Next slide. So tell your story. So one more detail here. So instead of just restating the TAM plan requirements, in the table we chose to include a question to help you tell your story or help you navigate through the requirements with your audience. This question eliminates the need for the audience to know the exact requirements. And if they really want to know the details, us enthusiasts, asset management enthusiasts, can gladly fill them in on the detail. So I look at this and tell your story, and it can be something as simple as, we own these assets. This is how we assess the condition of those assets. These are the people and processes and tools we use to make decisions about those assets. This is results of those decisions. These are our guiding principles, and these guiding principles, in my mind, should kind of should relate to your themes, if you will, that Mish had mentioned. How you're going to go about implementing your TAM plan. What are your key annual activities that you're going to commit to every year? Identification of resources. How are you going to do this? Do you have internal staff? Do you have a contractor? Is it a mix, etc.? And then evaluation plan. This is important to say, does the system, does our TAM plan actually deliver the results we actually want? So again, the questions are there to assist you in with communicating your audience, to your audience. Next slide. So now we're back here at the end result. And before we move on, I'd like to share you how we've used it in the past and how we plan on using it moving forward. So last July, a group of our board members were headed out to the TRB conference in San Diego, and we knew that they were going to encounter the conversation about the TAM plan, the requirements, and the inevitable question, are you going to meet the October deadline? So this was a great opportunity for us to test this prior to it being published. And before they left, we had met with them, walked through this information, and this is something they could take with them, but this was just reassurance for them that when they encountered these conversations, they felt confident that their staff back at home has got this handled, and they're going to meet the deadline. Moving forward, we plan to use this document with our new asset management staff, or anybody we're going to introduce the idea of asset management to within the organization. And we've even got some new asset management staff start next week. And there's a lot for a new member of the team to consume, but I think the TAM plan is important enough to understand, even if it's only the simplified version to start. And then, again, we'll also use this during our the onboarding process for new board members. We have a training session where they have an introduction to different departments throughout the agency, and this will be used again to say this is a snapshot of where we're at with our TAM plan and meeting those requirements. And then a final note here is if you're thinking this document and this table are overly simplistic, you're 100% correct. And I think I just want to remind you that making the TAM plan easier to understand makes it tangible to a larger audience. Tangible to a larger audience helps us change that culture and shift that focus. Next slide. So I just wanted to touch on some of the ongoing communication efforts here and kind of a trap we here at RTD have kind of fallen into. So as you can see from the list, we're communicating very specific asset management topics to a limited number of people. So an agency close to 3,000 people, I bet you we're communicating to regularly to 100 people, so a small fraction. So again, specific asset management topics to a limited number of people. This should sound very familiar to how I described our TAM plans at the beginning of the presentation. All of this information, ISO certification, asset class strategies, asset management plan, the connection between asset management and finance, performance targets, etc. It's all been really, really valuable to the organization and helping us in our maturity, but it's only to a small fraction of our employees and a handful of our external stakeholders. So what about the rest of the employees? So what about the other stakeholders? And I think this is an area, to be honest, where RTD needs to improve. And to address the situation, we're working with our communications department to develop an asset management communication plan for the agency. And this would be a systematic approach to deliver the right message to the right people at the right time. So I was hoping we'd be a little bit further along so I could share some more details, but we're not. And however, I'd be more than willing to share the communication plan when it's finally developed to the standards working group, to anybody here on the call. But with that, that's it for me. Next slide. So I don't know if there's any specific questions there. Enough to go ahead.
Okay. So you guys have been at this for a very long time. I can remember going to conferences with the RTD staff as early as 2012. So I can't imagine that this Wrapup in the summer was not the first time you spoke to the board about asset management. When did you guys start that communication process with them?
So we've been communicating with the board. It was an initial idea, actually. The idea of asset management actually came up in a board study session. I believe it was 2010. So this general idea has been circulating, but we started really communicating with the board, I believe, in 2012, and then annually every year with the board. Now we've incorporated that with the board study session, so that's twice a year. They get an update. One is specifically about asset management, and the second one is in support of our finance division to kind of make the connection between taking care of our assets and I guess the money side of the house. So we've been communicating this, but we still need to bring awareness to operators, mechanics, the taxpayers here in the district, you name it. We need to do some work here.
All right. Have you seen a shift in the conversation since you've been doing this outreach, even with the pocket full of people that have been getting it?
Yeah, I think we've seen a shift. We try to keep and maybe this is maybe too much information here, but we saw the October deadline coming, and we're trying to think of a way to keep the momentum. And part of keeping that momentum was the choice to pursue ISO 55000 as an established framework for asset management, and that's a choice RTD's made. It has its pluses and minuses, but so our conversation has shifted from merely meeting compliance and the deadlines to how do we change our business? How do we change how RTD does business? And where the conversation has really changed is within finance and how we view prioritizing our investments, and then just high level compliance, renewal, and enhancement are the three types of investments. And that's something we're embracing, is to say, let's take care of compliance first, then let's take care of the things we already own, and then let's take care of, then let's consider expansion and enhancement type of projects. So it went from compliance and now to trying to meet change the business.
No small task for such a large agency, huh? Very
it's been entertaining.
At least to the members of the TAM book club, right?
Yeah, exactly. Hope you guys found humor in that.
So we do have a couple of questions from our audience. One just is a question for you, Luke. How did you pick the level of detail to include in your summary there, and specific to like condition assessments?
So for us, I'm not sure what slide number that is. So for us in condition assessment, the slide under requirement number 2, we just said under revenue vehicle, age base, guideway, under performance restriction, physical condition, and age base. And that was just, so it's very, very high level. And again, because you can start to get into the weeds with age, physical condition on, that's a really big conversation. If somebody's interested, we try to keep it at the highest level possible. And then based on our audience and who's interested, we'll go into that detail. We'll pull in our inspection standards. We'll pull in our inspection procedures, et cetera, and just kind of use that as a jump off point.
Okay. Great. And the next question is one for Mish. Can you tell the audience how long the TAM aspirational video is? Or inspirational video?
Sure. It's not technically an inspirational video. It's just a video that describes the asset management program. But our wonderful partners at SEPTA and San Joaquin RTD do an excellent job of sharing some of their experiences in implementing their asset management programs. And I believe the video is about 2 minutes to 2:15 or around there. It's not too short, but I think it's worth it.
Yeah, I think it really.
Oh, I was going to say, I just wanted to point out, my presentation focused on the executive communication, but I believe that this communicating your TAM plan goes well beyond that. And Luke mentioned that in his last slide about the communications that he has within RTD. But I'd also like to point out that there's also communication with other agencies, for instance, FTA's oversight program. And this document could be a wonderful way to have all of your information, whether it be in that one document or at least some sort of, with the links, information of where the additional information is located, so that those folks that maybe are not part of the TAM book club would still have access to the information needed in order to answer the reviewers' questions. I did want to point that out.
Great. Okay. Okay. So the next question that we got is, I'm particularly interested in educating and supporting group plan participants and how to use and implement their TAM plan. Does this tool support group plan sponsors in this need? Yes, we did develop this tool in a way that it was flexible enough that it could be used by a large tier 1 agency, but it was also developed with the idea that it could be used to communicate requirements and or components of a group TAM plan. Luke, I don't know if you want to get into that any further.
So, like I said, in the appendix, we've got tier 1, we've got tier 2, and we've got group TAM plan examples. And those were examples from one of the participants within the standards working group. So that is something, it's actual information from tier 2 and group TAM plan. So it is feasible, and it should help you communicate those requirements to your specific audience.
Okay, the next question that we got is, what is the outline for your NTD narrative report? Mish, is this something that we can address here without the NTD staff on the phone?
Yes, because the narrative report is a CAM program requirement. It's a very quick question. There is no specific format. However, we have examples and templates on the TAM webpage for the NTD narrative report that you can go and take a look at.
Great. So this is another question for Luke. How many team members of the RTD dedicate to TAM?
So, from a compliance activity, I'm trying to think of the best way to answer this question. So, right now, the entire team's goal is ISO certification. So that is our primary goal. We have, should know this off the top of my head, 15 members of the asset management team here. So we have 15 full-time staff working towards implementing, I'm just going to general statement, asset management at RTD. Not specifically, I'm not doing a good job of answering this question. We use the TAM plan that we submit as a snapshot of where we are as an agency, which includes ISO as our framework, and that is where the majority of our efforts go, is to establishing that framework around ISO, but 15 staff members to consistently push that forward. We have a data group, and we also have originally it was called the SGR group, but now it's the physical asset analysts group, and that's a dedicated group of people that go out every month and talk to those asset stewards about those assets, about the asset class strategies, about their asset management plan, their renewal schedules, etc. So I don't know if that answers that question.
I think you do. I just got to bring the SEPTA perspective. We have 3.5 staff dedicated to the asset management program. We have that half head is somebody that's going through an orientation program. So he's been actually working with the asset stewards directly. We are leaning on our asset stewards probably a little more heavily than RTD is, but that's how we have structured our program. So I think the underlying theme of when you ask people this particular question is there's no right answer, and you do what you need to do to fit the dynamic of your agency. Here is another one for both SEPTA and RTD. How interested and involved were your executive management teams and or boards at any time during creation of your TAMs? And was it formally adopted by either transit agency's board of directors?
So I can.
Well, I should say go ahead, Luke.
From RTD's perspective, this is part of our general manager's goals. Originally, it was TAM plan and the requirements there for compliance. That was part of our general manager's goals, so it was well communicated to the board, and obviously very important to our general manager, Dave Genova. And then from there, we kind of, I guess, upped the ante, and he attached ISO 55000 certification to his goals as well. So this has been well communicated to our senior staff, our board, our general manager, and we got a pretty strong commitment there from leadership, which is really good for RTD to help us kind of change the culture here.
Yeah. So our asset management program was actually, it was born out of my now general manager, who was the chief engineer at the time, went to the first State of Good Repair Roundtable in Washington, D.C. And he really appreciated some of the efforts that some of our peer agencies had made in being able to communicate the impact of infrastructure condition and state of good repair on service quality. So Jeff has been on board with the asset management initiative since the very beginning. And as a culture at SEPTA, particularly since we're in a legacy rail system, we really have embraced this idea of using the state of good repair to help guide your decision making. As far as the board is concerned, while we have not had the board adopt our TAM, they have been supportive of our efforts. They appreciate that we can give them information about the state of the system, and they have supported the program by allowing to give us those heads to actually staff the program. Here is a question for Mish. Can you direct me to the language that dictates the requirement for a physical signature on the TAM plan?
So I would direct that person to take a look at the final rule and to review the requirements, and actually probably take a look at the preamble in the section for approving the TAM plan.
Okay, this is another one for the FTA. Has the FTA had to enforce the rule with any agencies?
So I would say that October 1st was the enforcement of the rule with every agency, but if you mean have we had to have a negative or confrontation with any agency, the answer is no. The asset management community has very much so accepted and supported the implementation of the rule, and most of the grantees that I have interacted with have been well beyond the minimum requirements for asset management. For those that maybe have not, I don't think that they've had their oversight reviews yet, but the first oversight reviews are occurring now, and I believe that's when we will find out the quality, well, not the quality, but the compliance level on a national level. But it'll be 3 years before we visit every agency. But I would like to reiterate that the overwhelming response that I have seen has been beyond the minimum of compliance.
Great. Okay, the next one is, again, a question about the rule, Mish. Is performance restriction really condition? It is only a % of track miles under restriction, but not the condition of the track.
The question is what?
Let me repeat this. They're asking for some clarification on whether a performance restriction is really indicative of condition.
So they're trying to interpret the regulation. The performance measure, the performance measure is the restriction as stated in the rule. And the performance measures are proxies for a state of good repair. They are not the exact assessment of a state of good repair, but a proxy for the sake of burden. I think that's my answer to that question.
Okay. So, Luke, do you have any sort of TAM or State of Good Repair roadshow in your own organization to get the information out about TAM?
So that is actually something we've been discussing with our communication department. We've been thinking about a video entertaining the idea of a video of our general manager, kind of a commitment to his commitment to the organization, an external website, the road shows. So these are all things in discussion. I wish I could tell you that we are doing those road shows, but right now we're currently not doing those.
Right. Now, I can say one of the things that we at SEPTA have done to communicate the importance of asset management and state of good repair that's been a little bit non-traditional is that all of our junior engineers that come into the infrastructure division actually have to spend a month in my department learning about asset management, both the compliance side with FTA, but also how to perform those condition assessments and how to think about asset management as a after they move into what their hired positions are going to be. So there's a lot of different ways to communicate, and that's kind of, we took a bottom-up approach with that particular initiative, and it's been being received pretty well.
So I guess the one thing that we do on a regular basis is meeting with those asset stewards monthly. So our analysts meet with those asset stewards. Like I said, we talk about those asset class strategies and how it feeds into the AMP. However, so that's good. So we do have reoccurring, but it's not to the masses. So we do talk about very specific things to very specific groups, but nothing from a very something where people can just walk up and kind of chat with us. So, but we're working on that, and I'm hopeful we can share that in the future.
Great. So, Luke, this next question has to do with how you do your condition assessment. It's a bit long, so I'm going to read it. How many contractors, number of vendors do you use to do asset condition assessments, or is it all in-house? Do you have PEs on your staff, or is your organization involved in that condition assessment process? I guess the question is, how do you do all your condition assessments, and what kind of staff do you have, either in-house or contractors doing those?
So we've got, originally, all of that is, all of that is done internally. When we do condition assessments, all of that is done internally. However, so for bus, rail infrastructure, we've tapered off a little bit on how many of those inspections, so we're moving to more of a sampling plan there. But a lot of the staff from the analysts, and they were originally called SGR inspectors, came from with internal, so they came from with a lot of asset experience. So all of those original condition assessments were done internally, and then for some things like bridges, there's a well-established industry and very strict standards on how you assess the condition of bridges, and that is something that we just take the output of those, and that's done by a contractor. So that condition assessment is done by a contractor. We take that condition assessment, and we've just got a process where we translate their information to our, using air quotes here, our 0 to 5 score, just so it's kind of on par with the other scores that we have for our assets. So that one is external, but bus, facilities, rail infrastructure, public facilities, you name it, we do that in-house. And we do have an engineering or capital programs department, so if we need to defer to get additional expertise, we can always do that as well.
Gotcha. Okay, this is another question about the composition of your team. Does the 15 team members include consultants or the data group and SGR group, physical asset groups? They're all RTD staff, aren't they?
Sorry, I was on mute.
Okay.
So yeah, so our staff includes the 2 different teams. 15 of those are all RTD. again, we've got the two teams, the analysis side of the house, and then the data side of the house, and then I'll just call it the SGR side of the house. So that's how we split that there. And then we have, during our ISO, we had an initial gap assessment for ISO 55000. This gets into the contractor piece of it. We had an initial assessment, so we brought in contractors to provide that gap assessment against the ISO 55000 standard. And now we have some contracted services through a contractor to assist us in that roadmap to, I guess, if you will, translate some of the ISO 55 standards and how it, I guess, translate into RTD language. So, but 15 of us are all RTD staff.
Sorry, I was on mute that time. This is a question for both of us, Luke. Was your internal audit department involved in the development of your TAM plan or your evaluation?
No. So our internal audit department was not, trying to think here. Nope, we did not have audit as part of that. We have a 2-person audit team here, if my memory serves me correctly, but they were not part of our TAM plan development.
Yeah, and I can say for SEPTA, they were not involved in our TAM plan development as well. They have had some requests of us as we put in our enterprise asset management software. But as far as the actual TAM plan and FTA compliance, they have not been involved. Okay. Here's another question for both SEPTA and RTD. Is there one thing you wish you could go back in time and tell yourself that would help better communicate your TAM plan and needs?
Ooh, that's a good one.
I don't think I've ever been asked this one before. This is good. For me, I think if I could go back in time, I would tell myself to be very patient and try to think of different ways to say the same thing to different audiences. And I would remind myself that this is an iterative process and it's a pretty lengthy process, and to not get discouraged when it takes a little while to find certain pieces of information.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess to add to that, one thing that we found really successful, and it took us a while to figure this out, is a generational approach. I think a lot of people want to go to this, I don't know if you will, this end awesome euphoric state where everything's perfect, and it's just not feasible. We just have to make a meaningful step forward. Take that meaningful step forward and just say, yes, this is what we're doing right now. Let's just take a step forward in the right direction. Generational approach, I think, would be something. And I think that goes along with being patient, to Laura's point. But generational approach, just do the next right thing. You can't do all of the right things at the same time.
And Laura, nobody asked me, but I'd like to share. I would say communicate early and often, and also that it's okay to have a big dream or a big vision, but have reasonable and bite-sized steps. So I have learned that you have to say the same thing many times before it actually starts to sink in terms of what it actually means. And the more often you communicate your vision, the more people that will join you on the way to that vision.
Mm-hmm. No, that's right. I mean, that can even help you with the simple conversations of what are you going to do with my data to, if we're not ISO, we're not doing things right, or whatever the messaging is from whoever you're talking to. So here's another question we got. Given the differences in the size of the asset management teams in FTA and RTD, it is clear that no best case or best industry practice has been established. Interested to see how to better align what asset management standards can be if we have such a difference of implementation in the agencies.
Yeah, that's I don't know. I think
to
me, it's asset management. To me, it's scalable, and I think it depends on commitment. If you want to go above and beyond, it's going to take a lot of effort, and I don't care if it's effort from 15 dedicated staff in asset management or 200 people doing it part-time within your organization. So if you want above and beyond the compliance, it's going to take commitment. So if you want to mature, the effort and the alignment in those efforts around asset management, it's going to be greater. If you're just seeking compliance, I think that effort might be different. It still might be a lot, but it's just going to be different. So I don't know. I see where if you're trying to seek a standard around asset management, and if we are all the same, it'd make life super easy, but then it wouldn't be any fun. It needs to be different and difficult.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, each agency has its own nuances and the way that it's been set up, and all of that legacy can't be overlooked when you're starting to implement these new policies and procedures. And I don't think that it's a good idea to scale an agency's level of engagement in the asset management program based on the size of their asset management staff alone. It just means that they've taken a different path or a different approach to getting what they need to do to ultimately put together plans to help us all as an industry get to and achieve a state of good repair.
So just as a tidbit in regards to resources and staffing requirements, Lou Cripps, my manager, is putting out a paper in August about resourcing strategy around asset management and our experience there. So that's something you could look forward to. But just a side note.
Gotcha. Nish, do you have anything that you want to add to this?
Yes, I wanted to also mention that FTA is taking a different approach to our roundtables this year, and we're going to actually have 2 roundtables, one for multimodal properties and one for bus-only properties. The multimodal roundtable will be July 16th through 18th in Baltimore, and the bus-only roundtable will be September 4th through 5th in St. Louis. You can find registration information for both of those on the TAM webpage, www.transit.dot.gov/TAM. And we're going to have another webinar on the 30th, which talks about the alignment between the planning regulation, the TAM regulation, and the safety regulation. So that is definitely must-see TV. It will be recorded and available if you haven't registered. So take a look on our webpage, Outlook, for information on that. One last thing, the roundtables are only open to public agencies, as in all the years past. So only public properties are able to attend.
Great. lot of great dialogue occurs at those roundtables. So if you haven't been to one, I strongly encourage you to go to them this year. I'm really excited about the new approach that you're taking with this too. Okay, we have time for one final question. And it's asking Luke and I how we get our cost estimate information for repairing of an asset. Do you use historic data or base it on a standard like RS means?
So I'll take a stab at that one. So we use a work order system, Trapeze, we call it Maximus, but just a work order system. We use cost information there about PMs, repairs, but in facilities and public facilities, our capital programs group does use RS means as a way to do general estimates there. But as we move forward and we get new information, if a project's been completed, we just insert the actual project costs, appropriate it to the right assets, or appropriate that to the right assets, including new in-service dates, etc. But yeah, we use a work order system and we use RS means.
And we take a very similar approach at SAPTA, and a lot of that depends too on what the actual future action is going to be for that particular asset. So that can shape the approach you take as well. So that being said, we've hit the end time for our webinar. I want to thank you all for participating, for asking such great questions. I especially want to thank Ms. Shadoni and Luke for their time and their expertise in putting together their presentations. And I'm looking forward to continuing the dialogue with you all at our next webinar. Thank you.